Jim, again, thank you so much. I cannot stop thanking you for agreeing to talk to us in this very important and confusing 24 hours. You mentioned you're in Brussels. You mentioned that 24 hours has been intense. Could you just unpack for us what's happening in Brussels now at NATO? 24 hours basically following the incident with the missiles in Poland.
Well, right now in Brussels, things have calmed down. The allies met this morning at 10 o'clock, and by 10 o'clock this morning, it became clear that nothing was clear. It became clear that what was thought yesterday, particularly last night, that this was a Russian missile that had come into Polish airspace and had landed in Poland. It had become clear by this morning that that wasn't necessarily the case. They were trying to figure out still what it was. They thought that it might have been a Ukrainian surface-to-air missile that had been used in the air defense of Ukraine to shoot down Russian missiles, but that it might have missed and landed in Poland. And so by the time they met, they were beginning to move away from the story that it was actually a Russian missile, because that's what the Polish government opened up with. When this thing first happened, and in fact, the reports were that there were two missiles, but I think, frankly, it really was a reminder to all of us that when these things happen, usually the first reports are not true. Not that people are lying, but it's just that the facts aren't known and conclusions are drawn. And in this day of social media, that just has a life of its own and just spread very quickly. And so it takes time to figure it out. And so by the time NATO met, in fact, the Poles were not insisting on Article 4, their right to confer with NATO. They were kind of backing that up a little bit, and the alliance was saying, well, let's talk about it. And pretty soon, by the time of the press conference that the Secretary General had after that North Atlantic Council meeting, it was pretty sure that this was a mistake, and it was a Ukrainian surface-to-air missile, and the Poles were saying that too. So things have calmed down. But I know I'm talking a bit here, but just to say that this was a real test of NATO, and it was a real test of the allies, because no one jumped to conclusions. We knew we needed to work with Poland, and we needed to help Poland deal with whatever this was. And no precipitous decisions were made. And so finally, when the allies were able to meet, 12 hours or so after the incident, everyone was calm and deliberative and very sober-minded about this, and then concluded that, in fact, this was not something shot by Russia, and certainly not something shot with any intent. So NATO passed a test here, and the allies passed a test that they were able to deal with spillover, which had been, always worried about that there could be spillover. Here was our first real incident of spillover, and I think the NATO alliance handled it very well.
That was my next question, Jim. With the war basically going on in the heart of Europe, it was kind of predictable that something like that might happen at some point, right? And you were just talking about the spillover. Did it take NATO off guard, or there was some preparedness for this?
Well, that's a great question. I think whenever something like this happens, it's always a surprise. Russia has been firing missiles, unfortunately and tragically, firing missiles into Ukraine for a while now. So I think there was an expectation that something could go wrong. In war, I remember during the Kosovo air campaign, there was errant bombs, that type of thing would happen. And so these kinds of things are expected, but when they happen, it's a bit of a surprise. And so you don't know if you're ready until you go through one. And I think NATO showed that it knew enough from its experience now in warfare, whether it was Kosovo or 9/11. There's now a lot of experience in the alliance about how to handle surprise like this. And so I think while they might not have had a drill and practice this kind of thing, I think there were enough seasoned people at NATO headquarters, so that they said, let's don't jump to conclusions, let's investigate, let's don't point fingers, let's help Poland, and we'll find out what happened, and then we'll decide what to do. And that's exactly the route that they took.
Jim, when it just like you described, it seemed like first there was this temptation to go to the option Russia did it, because it's a default option, more or less rhetorical in the last months. Then there was a talk of Article 4 and Article 5, and we were just all worried here, spent a sleepless night just looking at what might unfold there.
That's right.
But Article 5, Article 4, they all imply collective response in the situation of a deliberate attack. Do people in NATO really expect Russia to be attacking NATO territory? Is it something that is even fathomed right now in Brussels?
Well, that's an important question. I believe NATO right now doesn't expect Putin to attack an ally because I think there's a understanding or a feeling that for Putin that would be a huge mistake. A rational actor, if you will, wouldn't do something like attack the world's most strongest alliance when their fight, their problem was Ukraine, and they were in there and they're not doing very well. So why would Putin go off and attack NATO? But that's, of course, based on that he's a rational actor. And we don't really know that. He has done some things that were irrational, like attacking Ukraine. So, and the mistakes that he's made there. And, so I think while on the one hand, NATO doesn't necessarily expect Putin to attack an ally, we have to be ready just in case he does. We have to be ready to reassure our allies who are very nervous about this. And also, on the other hand, we don't know Putin's intent. We can't read his mind. He could surprise us and do something like that. Or there could be a mistake, like almost happened here, where there's an errant munition, a rocket or a missile or a bomb, and there's a miscalculation, and we end up in a fight. So it can happen by mistake too. So I think that's really where NATO is. We have to be ready. We don't expect it, but we have to be ready. We have to be ready for our allies to reassure them. And in war, there's always a surprise around the corner. Sometimes surprises based on a mistake. And so we have to be ready. And I think the alliance showed overnight and this morning that they were ready.
Jim, based on all your experience with NATO, I just wanted to pick on that, mistake part of this issue. So if there were to be a mistake, and if there were a Russian missile hitting, say, a target in Poland or on the territory of any ally country, and that was a mistake, would NATO be still invoking Article 5, going to war with Russia, and essentially, as people are saying, war of Russia and NATO is a World War III?
So there's nothing automatic about Article 5. I think the allies showed us yesterday that they're going to make sure that there was intent behind this, that this was really a Russian attack before they'd be willing to even consider something like Article 5. So they're going to go through the investigation, unless it's obvious, bombers, flown over Warsaw, that's one thing. But they're going to make sure that it's not a mistake. They're going to make sure that their decisions, their calculations have been based on the facts, and the facts have pointed to it being a Russian missile and a Russian attack, premeditated intent to attack an ally. They're going to wait to make sure they've got evidence of that. And an example, of course, is after 9/11. It took a couple of days before NATO invoked Article 5. They had to make sure it was Al Qaeda and not some other terrorist group that did those horrible events on 9/11. So again, in this case as well, if it's a mistake and they find out it's a mistake, there's not a war in the offing. It's going to be a mistake, and the allies will have to then decide what are they going to do. They're going to certainly go to Russia and say, explain this. And so, they'll have to look at other options too that don't necessarily involve going to war. NATO will not go to war unless the allies all agree that they have got to protect an ally who's come under attack. And to make that decision, they want to make sure it's the right one and not based on miscalculation or misjudging a mistake.
Jim, one more curious feature of this debate discussion. Ukraine was claiming for a number of hours, and I think is still insisting on the fact that it doesn't trust its allies necessarily in identifying the source of explosion and demands access to the accident site to participate in the investigation. Does Kiev have any reasons not to trust the allies, and what do you think Ukraine is trying to achieve by this?
Well, I haven't seen that myself. I haven't seen the latest reporting on something like that. But I would hope that Ukraine has bigger things to worry about than what's happened with this missile and with Poland. I think Ukraine doesn't have much of a choice but to trust NATO and to trust Poland that's done so much for Ukraine. They need to trust because we've got their best interests in mind, and we've got our best interests in mind too. There's no reason for us to do something that would upset Ukraine. So I think there doesn't seem to me to be much of a reason for Ukraine not to trust all the decision making and the investigation and all the work that had been done to make sure that we understood what happened last night. I would hope that they would leave that to us, and for them to go on pursuing the Russians in the south and up in the north. I think they've got their hands full, and let us deal with what happened in Poland.
Jim, if the incident was a litmus test to the preparedness of the alliance, you said, and to its reaction and to its readiness to actually unpack the events the way they were happening, should we rest a little bit more assured everywhere in Brussels, in Washington for that matter, that the war, this big war that has been discussed, the possibility of which has been discussed for quite a while, will not happen just by accident, just like that?
Well, these accidents happen in warfare, and I certainly can't promise any better than anyone else that we don't wake up one morning and find ourselves in a conflict because of an accident. But I can say that whether it's the nations, the U.S. or Poland or Germany or whoever it might be, as well as the alliance itself, that we act very prudently and we make sure that we don't become the victim of a misunderstanding. We have deconfliction channels, frankly, with Russia, where if there is something has happened and we need to figure out if this was a mistake or what was this, we get in touch with Russia. And I'm sure that probably happened over the past 12 hours where very quietly behind the scenes, counterparts were trying to figure out just what this was. And so I think the alliance and the nations too go to great lengths to make sure that we avoid a situation where we wake up one morning and we find out that we're at war and how did this happen? But if this intent is there, if Russia has a nation and an ally in his sights and he wants to do something, well, NATO is going to be right there to defend that nation. We're not going to sit there and wring our hands and think, for 4 to 5 weeks what's going on. Once we see that there's an attack has taken place, we'll do the right thing. But I think if it's murky and we're not quite sure, then we're going to take the time to figure it out before we do take an action. And I think post 9/11, we saw NATO do that to great effect.